If you're a cricket addict, it entrances you. If you're not, you must think that everybody who reads it is round the twist.
Anything you want to know about cricket? The Cricketer's Bible, I think would be the way to describe it.
And I was editor for 6 years, and great fun the years were too.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Wisden.
There's no publishing phenomenon quite like Wisden. There's no literary phenomenon quite like it. What it is an accidental and incidental social history of England, achieved by a fluke, by accident, not with intent, nevertheless achieved, and so it's got richnesses in it which you can't find anywhere else.
Every spring, as the last daffodils fade, another splash of yellow arrives to take their place. But before 60,000 copies of Wisden's Cricketers Almanack go out to gild the nation's bookshops, a handful of cricket notabilities gather in a club in St. James's. As well as the pleasures of the table, an advance copy in the familiar saffron covers awaits each fortunate guest. No other game has so institutionalized the question of refreshments. Lunch and tea are enshrined in the very laws of cricket.
He didn't talk to him, but he couldn't. And that was that.
The MCC doesn't exactly legislate for dinners, but they're part of what makes cricket the most sociable of all the ways in which human beings try to get the better of each other. The Wisden dinner is the cream of cricket gatherings, as befits a sporting annual now in its 124th year. Every cricketing arena is a kind of potpourri of its own past, but none is so haunted by games of long ago as Broad Halfpenny Down near Hambledon in Hampshire. Batsman and bowler have duelled across this stretch of ground for nearly 250 years. And for one deathless interlude, between 1770 and 1790, Hambledon had the leading side in England. The reason we know so much about Hambledon's great players is because of John Nyren, the chronicler of the club's glory days. He was brought up at the Bat and Ball on Broad Halfpenny Down, where his father, a much feared bowler, was landlord. Towards the end of his life, in the Cricketers of My Time, John Nyren recollected in tranquility the heroes of his youth. This is how Nyren described the thrill when the best players in the country descended on Broad Halfpenny Down. Little Hambledon, pitted against all England, was a proud thought for the Hampshire men. Defeat was glory in such a struggle. Victory made us little lower than the angels. Nyren's book was the first important piece of cricket literature. It showed how the story of what happened when 22 men took each other on with bat and ball could be told and retold, times without number. Always subtly different in its interplay of human character and its variations on the theme of triumph and disaster. In demonstrating the truly endless fascination of writing about cricket and cricketers, Nyren's account of summer days on a hilltop in Hampshire led eventually to the phenomenon of Wisden. Born in Brighton in 1826, John Wisden was to become, at 5'4", the smallest fast bowler in history. In 1851, the Little Wonder, as he was known, took 455 wickets. The previous year at Lord's, he clean bowled all 10 batsmen in an innings, a feat never equalled in first-class cricket. In 1859, in a vain attempt to convert the heathen, he set off with England's 12 champion cricketers on a tour of America. But Wisden would merely be among the game's forgotten worthies, were it not for his venture into publishing in 1864. He could not have imagined then that 123 editions later, his modest speculative potboiler would be treasured by the greatest observers of the modern game.
It's a remarkable piece of work, you know, this first edition of Wisden. But it's only that thick, because this is the first 3 bound up together. And It was only 112 pages, and even at that he was pushed to fill it because he didn't really know what to put in. Strangely enough, you see, there'd been the 2 Lily-Whites before it, and they just hadn't sold. And looking at the first one, you're surprised that in the second he said how well it had sold, because he really had to pad out. Now, at the end, all right, perhaps it's not so hard to get results of the St. Ledger and the Derby, but the laws of Nur and Spell come a little strange. All right, let's take the laws of bowls, but then, my word, we get on to kiting, university rowing matches, a list of the British societies, a list of canals, and finally, to round off the 112 pages in the right number of 8s, remarkable events, which is a list of the 8 crusades, and then the decisive battles of the Civil War and the martyrdom of Charles I. My word, he was hard pushed, wasn't he? Never was again. It was never so strange after that, though certainly some of the almanac entries are a bit odd. You don't expect to come upon John at Gaunt suddenly in the middle of a lot of cricketers' birthdays, but so it was. And he filled it, he'd sold, and he never looked back.
2/3 of every Wisden, about 900 pages, is a monument in print to the previous year's cricket. Articles, match reports, scores and averages evoke 12 months of the game in such detail that only a Frenchman or visitor from Mars could fail to get the hang of it. The remaining sections form a nostalgic dossier of the noblest exploits of the past, designed for fireside reading and settling bets. The early statistical records were far sketchier than today's, but in 1870, Wisden broadened his canvas by introducing reports of the previous year's notable games. The shameless grandiloquence of the language matched the spirit of the age.
Eton versus Harrow, Lords. The annually increasing attraction of this match among the upper crust of English society is something wonderful. So sure as one July succeeds another, and the much talked of Friday and Saturday arrive, so surely do the attendances at Lord's on these 2 fashionably important days increase in influence. The gatherings were as brilliant in rank as they were unprecedentedly large in numbers. The ground has on each day filled with a fair and fashionable assemblage. The very many carriages present were crowded with the manhood and beauty of the land. On Saturday the weather was splendid, the 2 sights of that day being the extraordinary scale that picnicking was carried on, and the unusual but charming picture that the old ground presented when covered by ladies promenading during luncheon time. The match was won by Eton by an innings and 77 runs.
Today's Wisden reporter writes a plainer style of prose. There's no room for exuberance if every first-class match is to be summarised. Eric Hill, Wisden's man in Taunton, has been compiling Somerset's match reports for over 25 years.
Somerset versus Gloucestershire. At Taunton, Somerset won by 118 runs. Somerset 20 points, Gloucestershire 3 points. Toss, Gloucestershire. Marks gave Somerset a good start, which was developed by both of them in 84 balls, and Harden, whose highest score in the championship came off 180 balls. An early declaration and a forfeiture left Gloucestershire a target of 330 in 90 overs, but a slightly grassy pitch and the combination of Garner, Taylor and Dredge proved too much for them. Only Athy and Romaines, with whom he added 59, made any realistic progress. And Gloucestershire's last 6 wickets fell in 8 overs for 47 runs.
The county summaries are coming in rather well.
We have done well.
Yeah, we got a good bunch, haven't we?
How many are missing, do you know?
I think about 4. I won't say who they are.
Wisden has remained a cottage industry. For the past 6 years, head office has been at Long Parish in Hampshire, home of John Woodcock. He's combined the editorship of Wisden with being cricket correspondent of the Times, a dual distinction surely unmatched in sporting journalism. Completing the team are Graham Wright, editor-elect on John Woodcock's retirement, and their assistant, Christine Forrest. With facts by the 100,000 to record, and an exacting readership ready to pounce, editorial neuroses blossom in the vain struggle to get every last thing right.
I've also got here, we've got to have something for a writer, a letter from, a good letter from a Hampshire man. Dear Sir, whilst perusing the 1985 Wisden, I saw the quotation you've included made by Robert Mugabe, who you call the President of Zimbabwe. It is an excellent quotation. All about, if you remember, the Zimbabweans and his own fondness for cricket. But unfortunately, for whom I know not, Mr. Mugabe, or Comrade as he is known in his country, is the Prime Minister. The President is a man called Canaan Banana, a man taken not by our summer game, but by association football. I'm sure Mr. Banana is used to people slipping up on Zimbabwe's un-African role of the President. Yours sincerely, Matthew Clark. So I'm afraid we've got to go for a writer, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, we'll see what we can do with that.
Letter too from Keith Miller here, but only to say that he hadn't backed the winner of the Melbourne Cup.
No section of Wisden has ruffled more feathers than the births and deaths of cricketers. The competition for space causes aggrieved contenders to be left out, while some slightly dubious ones, like W.G. Gracie's mother, stay in.
She's still there, she still survives. In fact, she survives obviously through family. We wouldn't, there are many Gracies in births and deaths. Let me see, I can't talk about births and deaths as much as I do without mentioning Robert Brooke. Who has worked for me on births and deaths, and I mean, one reader rather thinks that not only does he know when we were born, but he knows already when we're when we're going to hang up our batting gloves. But he's quite brilliant, Robert. We've got G.F. Grace, Dr. Edgar Gray. Good heavens, we've got. Just look at that. We've got a whole team of Gracies. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We've got a team of Gracies, including Mrs. H.M. Grace. Now, don't tell me that you think that I should have, that the Don's mother should be in, Bradman's mother, or that Ian Both's mother should be in. I'm not going to have that. But I wouldn't like to take up Mrs. Martha Grace.
Well, she does make up the 11.
And she makes up the 11, indeed she does. Absolutely, yes. I think probably she'd have, knowing what we do about her, that she wouldn't have gone in last either.
In cricket's golden age, brawn and spirituality came together in the muscular Christian, the type of sporting parson whose religious principles broadly comprised playing the game, keeping a straight bat, and walking when caught behind the wicket.
The reverends are magnificent. The reverends used to play this marvellous part in cricket history. There was a Reverend Gillingham, I think, gets the prize. He was the honorary secretary, I think, of the Worcestershire Club. And one day in the 20s, there was a terrible flood and the Severn overflowed and swamped the cricket pitch. And everything was in danger. And the Reverend Gillingham not only cast his bread on the waters, he cast himself into the waters. He threw himself into the... and swam across the ground, swam into the pavilion, retrieved the account books, put them between his teeth and swam back again. Now that is a wonderful example of reverend conscientiousness.
There have been a great many parsons who have been very good players. Presumably the most famous and the greatest player was going right back to Lord Frederick Beauclerk, who was probably, for some years, the best all-round player in England, almost certainly at one time the best batsman in England. Made a great many runs. But he was far from a model character. He, for instance, reckoned to make about 600 a year out of cricket. And his language was such that Dawson, who was hanged for horse poisoning, refused to travel in a stagecoach with him. Which must be somewhere like a record, I should think.
Though not one to be found in Wisden, in whose pages illustrious names combine with epic deeds to achieve a kind of religious truth of their own.
Shepherd, the bishop of Liverpool,
Such are the permutations of chance and human endeavour that 130 tightly packed pages of Wisden are devoted to records, items of cricket history unique to one player or place or team. Here you will find the awful ignominy of the Northamptonshire team of 1907, whose score of 12 against Gloucestershire is still the lowest innings total by any county. The same side, still prominent among records to be avoided, only scratched together 42 in their entire match against Yorkshire the following year. Family ties in Test cricket have a section all to themselves. There are plenty of fathers and sons who've played for their country, a grandfather, Vic Richardson, and his grandsons, the Chappell brothers, and then, with a gap of 82 years between them, W.H. Cooper of Australia and his great-grandson, Paul Sheehan. Outlandish dismissals are another eccentricity, obstructing the field, hitting the ball twice, and illegally handling it. Since 1970, 27 batsmen have been given out for these misdemeanours, 22 of them from the Indian subcontinent. Here also are the immortals, like Wilfred Rhodes of Yorkshire, only man to take 4,000 first-class wickets and achieve the double of 1,000 runs and 100 wickets in a season 16 times. There's the legendary schoolboy, A.E.J. Collins, who in 1899 in a junior house match at Clifton College scored 628, not out. In the same exceptional year, Albert Trott, playing for MCC against Australia, became the only man ever to hit the ball over the pavilion at Lord's. Frank Woolley of Kent not only took more catches than any other fielder, over 1,000 of them, but bagged 2,000 odd wickets and scored more runs than anyone except Jack Hobbs. One of Hobbs's great milestones along the way to preeminence came at Taunton on successive days in August 1925, when he equalled and then overtook W.G. Grace's record of 126 centuries. Hobbs's 61,237 runs stand alone among batting aggregates, as do his final tally of 197 centuries, by now written, you might think, on tablets of stone. But no, there's a move to promote him to within an ace of 200 hundreds.
I've had another letter about Jack Hobbs's aggregate number of hundreds.
What's the problem this time?
Oh, it's the old one, you know. He's always been credited with 197, and the Association of Cricket Statisticians have been at it again, and they've now decided that...
Is he going up or down?
Oh, he's going up, he's going up.
As the undoubted oracle of cricket, Wisden has to pronounce on all revisionist opinions. John Woodcock holds that the 2 extra hundreds claimed for Hobbs were not given first-class status even by the master himself.
And he always said himself that, of course, they weren't first-class matches, and that they were going to make quite certain, even if it meant dropping him or not appealing or whatever, that he did make 100, and when asked himself, he said, oh, good heavens, no. And he was, in fact, very keen at the end of his career to get 200, and he used rather to choose his matches, I believe, at the end. And he always felt that he didn't need 1 more, but he needed 3 more.
Since Hobbs scored his last run, each generation has added to the Wisden Hall of Fame. Hammond and Bradman, Edrich and Compton, Cowdrey, Boycott, Lilly and Botham have all been main leads in the long-running soap opera of cricket. Just occasionally a cricketing achievement so outstrips everything that's gone before that its significance goes beyond cricket itself. When Jim Laker took 19 Australian wickets at Old Trafford in 1956, he wrote himself not just into Wisden, but into history. At a lower cricketing level, but comparable in its staggering virtuosity, was the occasion when Gary Sobers hit Malcolm Nash of Glamorgan for a then unprecedented 6 sixes in 1 over. It was a natural for Wisden, but by great good fortune, television cameras were there too.
Oh, this is incredible. Now, this is 6 on the trot, it's a world record. And he's done it! He's done it! And my goodness, it's gone way down to Swansea.
During a cricketer's career, Wisden duly notes his progress. But his death gives a wonderful opportunity for a recap. The most melancholy and yet in some ways the most captivating section is that devoted to obituaries. Accuracy, as ever, is paramount.
When Miles Howell died, who had captained Oxford in 1919, Arthur Gilligan told me he'd bowled at him in the varsity match in 1919 when Miles made 170, and he said that Miles only hit 1-4. Well, that I thought was well worth putting into Wisden, but one must be accurate. I knew that Arthur would be roughly right, that he hit an incredibly small number of fours, and I could not find out anywhere the statistics of how many fours, threes, twos, and whatnot he hit. I got the account in the Times, I'd got the account in the Morning Post, I looked at Wisden, I couldn't find it anywhere. And finally I wrote to Miles's surviving sister, Cicely Bennett, and fortunately she had a family scrapbook which showed me. Miles, in fact, in that 170, had 3 fours and 16 threes. Very interesting to know the kind of thing that some of these statisticians might well look up, whether there ever has been an innings of 170s since the days of boundaries with fewer fours or with more threes.
I always think that the dog that used to field out in the Grace family practices should have been in there, but he's not. The only animal that's in there is Cat Peter. Peter Cat was the Lord's cat. He died, I think, about 15 years ago, and he was such a fixture at Lord's that when he died, Wisden duly gave him his obituary. And not only did they give him his obituary and saying he was a keen viewer of the game, who always watched from a certain point, but they also went to the MCC secretary and asked for an appreciation. And it was S.C. Griffith, and he said, Cat will be sorely missed. He was had an excellent sense of humour and an excellent working knowledge of the game.
Do you ever find that there are elements in a man's life which require a sense of discretion on the part of the obituarist?
Well, mainly I think captains, because otherwise, really, a man's character, at least we say a man's vices, they haven't much to do with whether he gets a place in a county side or not.
So,
I mean, a man may be a really horrible piece of work, and at the same time, he'd get on all right in the cricket world. It won't keep him out of a county side or out of an England side. May just turn the scale if it's a matter of tossing up between 2 players who take the nice chap and not the nasty one. But otherwise, so long as he behaves on the field of play and isn't caught cheating and that sort of a thing, it doesn't really affect his career. And it's nothing to do with Wisden, what he does off the field. He may be somebody who wouldn't ask you a house. He may be somebody who wouldn't have a deal with in business if you could avoid it.
I must commend, for instance, this chap, George Lacey. Now, in Wisden, George Lacey is said to be one of the very few men who could claim to have walked across Africa from east to west before the First Boer War. Now, this implies to me that after the First Boer War, Africa was congested with men walking across from east to west, and that even before that, hundreds had been in the habit of walking across from west to east. A man called Gander Dower. Gander Dower played cricket at Cambridge, and he did a variety of things, but his main achievement, it seems to me, was getting some cheetahs from India and bringing them home to race at London dog tracks. I don't understand what that's got to do in a cricket almanac, but there you are. Samuel Beckett has the honour of being the only Nobel Prize winner to be in Wisden, because he played in a first-class match for Dublin University against Northamptonshire. He got naught, by the way, which is probably why he became such a reticent man. The most incongruous reason for leaving the game is shared between N.A. Knox of Dulwich, who retired from cricket to become an understudy in a musical called The Dollar Princess at the Daly's Theatre, and I suppose a man called Hesketh Pritchard, who was an underarm bowler of the 1910s, who had a very brilliant career and retired because he went to Patagonia in search of the giant sloth. And as the giant sloth doesn't exist, it seems to me it had been pretty much of a wild goose chase. But it ended his cricket career anyway.
If the Grim Reaper has given Wisden some of its best material, at Lord's, in the more benevolent guise of Father Time, he symbolises the little punctuations, lunches, teas, innings closed, that intersperse the business at hand.
And even some of our test cricketers were watching Gavaskar in his marvellously correct methods. Here's Dilly from the pavilion end now, bowling to Amanat. Well pitched up outside the off stump. He's found the gap at mid-off. They'll take 2, possibly 3 here as Robinson chases it up below. They've taken the 2. He reaches the ball and they'll come on the throw. So that's 3 to Amanat. A nice confident stroke. Nice juicy half volley outside the off stump, but well pitched up, which is correct for Dilly, but it was just the half volley length. Well, so that makes Gavaskar face Dilly, who comes in past umpire Chef Bill short.
When the wisdom comes, well, it means the start of a cricket season, really. You know the new mown grass you smell and the bat oil, which they don't use now, but and then I always have the limp cover, because it's rather nice, I don't know, they're lovely yellow thing. And it's marvellous, and one delves into it immediately and looks up all the records and things that have taken place last summer. It just means the start of a new cricket season, which to me is heaven.
Gavaskar in his white floppy hat. There are 4 slips. As Dilly comes up, bowls this one to him. That's on his leg stump, and he gets right back. And Edmonds feels and flicks the ball back very quickly and knocks the stumps out. Edmonds has the habit of doing this. He loves just flicking the ball back, and he's a very quick reaction there. It stands pretty close, and I suppose it's...
One extraordinary thing happened during the winter when I was compiling the records for the present edition, and the list of county caps awarded. I wondered why Michael Holding hadn't been awarded his Derbyshire cap, this great West Indian fast bowler. And I phoned the Derbyshire secretary, and he was amazed as well. He hadn't realised that Holding had never been formally issued with a Derbyshire first-team cap, and in fact wasn't entitled to wear the first 11 sweater, so they've awarded it to him now and backdated it. He hasn't thanked me yet.
Pringle in, up to the wicket. He's there now, he bowls, makes a comes forward, edges that between second slip and third slip. He's going away for 4. Gatting won't stop that. It just bubbles over the rope there, up the bank, in front of the pavilion. There's a tiny bank before the pickets, as the Australians would call them. A 4, a rather fortuitous, edgy 4, that to Dilip Vengsarkar. He's now 16.
My first Wisden, I still have it actually, very battered, 1947, after Edridge and Compton here at Lord's, that marvellous season they had. I mean, it was a complete Bible. I can remember at my private school sitting down and copying vast tracts out. And if at that sort of time someone had said to me, Simons S.J., I, without a murmur, and without a moment's hesitation or a second's pause, would have said Leicestershire second 11, 1936, 1937. I did not bat in either year, bowled 28 overs and 4 balls, and 18 of which were maidens, and took 3 for 48. And I know I would have been right, you know. It shows what a religion it was even then.
But is it a religion, do you think?
Well, Crusoe Robertson Glasgow said it isn't actually a religion, but it's a jolly good substitute for one. I think, in a way, cricket is a religion, yes. I mean, I think it's extraordinary. I think at the start of a season here at Lord's, you see it. People who've been sort of waiting all winter for the start of the season turn up in bitter cold and wrapped round in overcoats to watch the opening exchanges. And probably one of the things they do that day is go to the bookstall to buy this year's Wisden.
How often do cricket experts, writers and commentators like you use Wisden?
We use it, in fact, a lot. It's invaluable on tour. You're always you know, one is terrified to miss a record, and so one is frantically going through it. I can remember very well when I was sort of fagging for Jim Swanton in the West Indies in the Cowdrey's tour in 67-8. And Jim did the test matches, and I did the other first-class games, and I sat beside him during the test matches, and when a record was coming up, he'd give me his wisdom and say, look it up. And I, of course, would look through it and be a little uncertain where to find it, and would get the most terrible stick from Swanton for actually being in the press box and not knowing immediately where to go and find how many people had ever been out for 99 on the 4th day of a test match at Port of Spain, you know. And I think mercifully when we had this row, it was at Port of Spain, and I don't think Wisden had it anyway. So Honour was satisfied.
I think the most useful thing it's ever done for me was that I got married the day after the university match, and I've never been able to remember dates. And I found that was absolutely invaluable because I could always remember when my wife's, when our anniversary was. And that, to my mind, is the greatest gift Wisden has ever given to me.
Here's Dilly coming in now. Bowls this one outside the off stump, and he's caught! Caught at third slip by Embry. Gavaskar out. Caught Embry, bowled Dilly.
I think if you look in Wisden's, 1950, there's a lovely mistake there, which is myself, where I was described as making my debut against Cambridge University in 1949 as a right-arm off-spin bowler, which I think, so there's the odd mistake like that. Another mistake, which I've pointed out on many, many occasions, of course, is Maurice Leyland, who played for Yorkshire. And in Wisden's, they spell his name M-A-U-R-I-C-E, and it's not. On his birth certificate, it was M-O. And a lot of people didn't know that. Now, a lot of us didn't know that, which is also something else, until Maurice died in 1966, and that's when we found out. And all those years in Yorkshire, they thought it was M.A.
What about the mistakes that occur in Wisden? Is that one of your nightmares?
I don't think it's not a nightmare in the same way as, you know, you can't find your box when you're going into bat or something like that, or you have lost your bat, or you can't find your badge. I don't think quite in that way. I think one mustn't allow it to be. And inevitably, you know, when you think that, what are there must be, heaven knows, 500 potential mistakes on every page, I suppose, aren't there, when you think of it? And it's, I like to think that we work on Wisden as we aim to be perfect.
Wisden is published under the imprint of John Wisden & Co. and has always made a respectable profit for the various parent companies which have owned it. 60,000 copies sold every year put it among the perennial blockbusters of British publishing. Yet the men who produce it are trapped between the amount of cricket clamouring to be included and a page size that's a hopeless mismatch. When John Wisden chose a format of 6 inches by 4, he had no idea his slim volume would one day swell to 1,300 pages. But the new editor, Graham Wright, would face an insurrection among collectors if the next edition didn't match its predecessors in all particulars. Wisden can't get any fatter without falling apart, so every year the quart is poured into the pint pot for the sake of tradition.
Wisden Cricketers Almanack, 37 in this lot, £150 is bid here.
Cricketing bric-a-brac is now so keenly collected that Phillips hold regular auctions just off Bond Street. Wisden's old and not so old, in good condition and not so good, are always on offer. Most prized are the very earliest years, before popular demand turned Wisden into a bestseller. Collectors will pay thousands for an 1864, but nothing like that for 1880. Some buy their Wisdens in job lots, others make it the work of decades to build a set volume by volume.
Something went out of my life when I collected my last Wisden. I think it was 1884, and I got a complete set, and my purpose in life seemed to have gone.
I was lying on my bed, very bored on a Sunday in Perth, and in the small ads column of the local paper, whilst on a tour of Australia, there was an ad for Wisdens from 1890 onwards. The ad had been put in by a former representative of Macmillan's in India, who had retired to Perth, very nice too, and I went and bought them on the spot. And he told me that the set originally ran from 1889, but a certain Indian cricketer had been in to look at it in search of some reference point, and when he went to look afterwards, he found that 1889 was missing, which is a lovely story.
I went down High Holborn one day in lunchtime and said, have you got any cricket books? And they'd only got odd ghosty stuff. This is almost immediately after the war. Then I said, as I was going, I said, is that all? He said, well, there's things called Wisden down the end. So I went down. And by heaven, there were the first 50 volumes, of Wisden, the property of the Earl of Belmore, and almost beautifully bound in half-calf. But the binder, it may have been a wonderful binder, didn't know much about cricket because he shaved the scores off, many of them. And I was very lucky to be able to get rid of that set to a man who esteemed bindings more than content.
Once in a while, a complete set of Wisden comes up for sale and creates tremors of interest among collectors of cricket honour, which nothing else can rival. In fact, this is not quite a complete set. The first few years are facsimiles. But it's of surpassing interest for another reason. Most collectors are not great cricketers themselves. They live vicariously through the recorded achievements of others. But the owner of this set was an exception. He was Percy Fender. As captain of Surrey, Fender's policy was to hit the ball with maximum force, and when bowling, to probe a batsman's every weakness. His efforts in the 1914 season earned him Wisden's greatest accolade, inclusion among the 5 cricketers of the year.
But perhaps his most celebrated exploit, which has never been beaten, was his world record for the fastest century of all time. It took place at Northampton on August the 26th, 1920. As the Wisden correspondent put it rather laconically, the hitting on the second afternoon was some of the fiercest of the season, Fender actually getting his 100 in 35 minutes. Always the supreme individualist, Fender was not content to leave his Wisdens in the original bindings. He had them all done in black morocco with gold lettering. Now the set he started collecting in the early years of this century is to change hands at last.
Lot 60, the Fender Wisden here. £4,000, please. At £4,000, thank you. 4,002 at £4,200. All done at £4,200. So 4,005 at 4,005. On my left then at £4,500.
Any game, and there's only one, which can boast a yearly anthology in unbroken line since 1864, can be excused for holding its traditions dear. Cricket has been not only an adornment of the life of many countries, but also an adornment of the English language. Wisden is the standard bearer for all that's best in the game and its literature, and is thus valued by people who would like to be cricketers as much as by cricketers themselves.
Walter Robbins, Walter read right the way through, taking Wisden as a bedside book. Every page he read right the way through for over 100 editions. And then he was nearly through on the second lap when he died. So he must have been pretty well, everybody knows, of course, he was pretty well informed about cricket. But such is the hold it can get on those of us who are daft enough to love that daft game.
Bowls to Bengtsak, who stretches for this and drives it through cover for 4. A lovely shot. Short back lift, put his front foot out to a wide swinging half volley and just no more than stroked it past cover for 4 with the beautiful timing that is the feature of Dilip Bengtsak's batting.